The Silence That Kills. Part 3. Shadows over Gravesend. The sky over Gravesend hung low with fog, thick as unspoken secrets. As the train pulled into the station, its brakes squealed like a scream muffled by years. Tuppence stared through the window at the silhouette of the town slate rooftops, narrow alleys, and a church spire that leaned ever so slightly, as if burdened by knowledge. No one was waiting on the platform. Not even the porter. Tommy glanced at the only other passenger still aboard, an elderly man with a cane and a blank stare. As the train hissed to a stop, he shuffled toward the exit, eyes not quite meeting theirs. Gravesend, the conductor muttered, almost under his breath. Last stop. Tommy helped Tuppence down. The platform was slick with dew, and the silence was unnatural. This place is watching itself, she whispered. They made their way to the only boarding house still taking lodgers. The Moorhaven Arms, a crumbling Victorian structure that reeked of disuse and damp wallpaper. The landlady, Mrs. Keene, was polite but distant. Her hands were too clean, her eyes too still. "You're lucky," she said, handing them a key. "Most don't come this time of year. The mist doesn't lift." "What about the others?" Tuppence asked lightly. Mrs. Keene blinked. "Others?" "Guests." The woman smiled too quickly. "Oh, they keep to themselves." Room 4 overlooked the harbour, or what was left of it. The water was still. No boats, no gulls, just the decaying skeleton of what once might have been a pier and the lighthouse. Tuppence stepped closer to the window. "Didn't Pendry say something about Gravesend being one of Chimera's training towns?" Tommy nodded. A place where lies were given flesh. The light from the tower flickered once, then went dark. That night, they walked the main street. Shops shuttered, curtains drawn. But in the distance, a light was on down a narrow cobblestone lane. The watchmaker's shop. Inside, clocks, hundreds of them, ticking at different tempos, hanging from walls, lining the floor, dismantled on tables, time fractured into pieces. And behind the counter stood Catherine Lee. Tuppence froze. "Catherine?" The woman looked older, her hair greyer, but her eyes still defiant, still sharp. "I hoped it would be you," she said. Tommy stepped forward. "We thought you were dead." "Close enough." She gestured around. "This town? It's a stage. Has been for years." "Chimera?" Tuppence asked. Catherine nodded. "They trained them here. The agents who didn't know they were agents. The people who forgot who they were. Then they shut it all down when the war moved east. But someone reopened it. Someone who wants the game played again." Tommy frowned. "Do you know who?" Catherine didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to a grandfather clock near the back, ticking erratically. "It's all in there," she whispered. "Names, coordinates, operations. I left it unfinished for a reason." Then she handed them a key. A small brass thing, no label, just an engraving. M. 1939. Revive. Suddenly, footsteps. Outside. Then the glass shattered. Bullets tore through the walls. Tommy shoved Tuppence down. Catherine ducked behind the counter. "Back door!" she shouted. They fled into the alley behind the shop, the ticking of clocks still echoing behind them. As they ran, Tuppence clutched the key, her voice tight. "Revive?" Tommy's face was grim. Not a code. What then? He looked at her. A command. Rain slicked the alley stones as they ran. Behind them, muffled voices shouted not German, not British military. Too clean, too clipped. Private, trained. Chimera operatives. They reached a side street. Empty. Gaslights. Flickering against thick fog. Catherine darted into a doorway and produced a skeleton key. "Safe house. Third one I've burned this year." The door creaked open, revealing a dusty flat. Maps. Notes. Disassembled radios. A small fire already lit in a broken hearth. Once inside, Tuppence locked the door behind them and dropped the bolt with a satisfying clack. Catherine sat, breathing hard. "They've reactivated it all," she said. "Gray's End, Aldwych, the entire program. The objective's not surveillance anymore. It's replacement." Tommy looked up. "Replacement?" She nodded. "Not just spies. Identities. People. Inserted into roles, into marriages, into governments." Tuppence frowned. "Infiltrators who believe they belong." "Because they do," Catherine said. "Or they think they do. That's what Chimera perfected, not training agents, but writing lives." Tommy paced. "And Langley?" Catherine's expression changed. She was one of the original handlers, one of the few who could still pull operatives out of a collapse, but she disappeared months ago, only recently started sending coded signals again. Tuppence pulled the small brass key from her pocket and placed it on the table. "This?" Catherine stared at it, then nodded slowly. "That doesn't open a door. It opens a vault." "Where?" Catherine stood, crossed the room, and pulled down an old maritime map from the wall. She tapped a point east of Gray's End. "The lighthouse. Beneath it, in the old naval tunnels. If Langley left anything behind, it's there." They waited until 3 a.m. The fog had thickened. The streets were ghost roads. The trio moved under cover of silence, crossing the harbour district until the base of the lighthouse emerged like a sentinel in the gloom. Tuppence whispered, "It looks abandoned." Catherine shook her head. "Nothing's ever abandoned in Gray's End. It just watches in silence." The entrance to the tunnels was hidden beneath a rusted grating, half covered by sand. It took all three of them to pry it open. They descended into blackness, Tommy leading with a torch. The air was damp and close, heavy with salt and mildew. Twisting corridors, rooms filled with rusted equipment. Then, a door. Metal, reinforced, a small keyhole, glowing faintly red. Tuppence fit the brass key inside. A click. Then, silence. And then, the door opened. Inside, a vault unlike anything they'd seen. Maps, photographs, tapes, documents marked with red wax seals, and the Chimera insignia, a triple-headed beast. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal of concrete, was a single box. Catherine approached it cautiously, then opened it. Inside, a reel of film and a note. The note read, "If you found this, they've already replaced me. You must follow the voice. It will know the truth. L." Tommy picked up the reel. It was labeled, "Chimera Master Run, August 1940. Subject." Tuppence whispered, "This isn't just history. It's blueprint." Catherine stared at the reel. "We need to find a projector." Part 3. Shadows over Gray's End. The projector they needed wasn't far. Catherine led them to an abandoned schoolhouse on the outskirts of Gray's End, one of Chimera's original training sites. The building creaked with age, its windows shattered, its chalkboards faded with wartime slogans. In the auditorium, beneath a tattered Union Jack, they found the machine. It groaned to life when powered, coughing out dust and memories. Tommy threaded the reel. The lights dimmed. The film clicked forward. And then, a voice. Subject M, initialization file. Audio, visual imprint. Run, sequence 4. The footage was black and white, grainy, a man seated in a room with no shadows, staring directly into the camera. His eyes were blank. His hands rested on a table. "My name is Richard Vale," Tuppence gasped. "He was presumed dead in 41. My assignment is infiltration. Role: Parliamentary aide to the Minister of Defence. My handler is Langley." The voice paused, then shifted. Override received. Handler changed. New directive. Nullify Langley. Maintain position. Assimilate. Catherine muttered. "This is the moment they turned him." Tommy's jaw clenched. "They didn't train him to spy. They trained him to forget who he was, to become a new person, utterly." Tuppence's eyes never left the screen. Which means M isn't a code. It's a designation. Catherine nodded. M isn't the traitor. M is the perfect product. Chimera's endgame. Final protocol activated. Replace. The reel sputtered and died. For a moment, no one moved. Then, from somewhere deep in the school, footsteps. Not one pair. Not two. Many. Catherine whispered, "They found us." Tommy grabbed the reel. Tuppence swept the documents into a satchel, and they bolted. Out through a side exit, across the yard, through fog and mud and memory. Bullets cracked behind them. A voice rang out. "Stop. By order of the ministry." But it wasn't military. It was too calm, too composed. They didn't stop. Hours later, hidden in a fishing shack along the coast, Tuppence crouched over the reel. Tommy leaned against the wall, blood on his sleeve, breathing shallow. Catherine paced. "This is it," Tuppence said. "This is what Langley was trying to get out. The proof." Catherine looked toward the door. "They'll come again, next time with fewer questions." Tommy grimaced. "Then we take the fight to them." Tuppence looked up. "We follow the voice." Part 4. The voice beneath the flagstones. The morning tide gnawed hungrily at the rocks below the shack, as if nature itself was trying to erase what had been hidden the night before. Tommy stared at the small reel of film in his hands. Cold, dusty, but damning. Tuppence was the first to speak. "Someone is feeding us this truth slowly, piece by piece, like a puzzle meant to delay, not reveal." Catherine, standing by the cracked window, didn't turn, because they know we'll never stop chasing it. And the more we chase, the more distracted we are from what they're actually doing. Tommy exhaled. "Which is?" She finally turned, her eyes haunted. "Replacing loyalty with obedience." Tommy's hands tightened around the reel. "Then we stop playing their game." Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "And do what instead?" "Rewrite the board." Outside, the mist hadn't lifted. The coastline was wrapped in a woolen shroud, the same lifeless grey as the secrets they now carried. Catherine motioned for quiet, then nodded toward the sea. A figure stood on the rocks. Not moving, not watching, just there. A man in a trench coat and dark hat, the kind you'd see on the edges of photographs that went missing from government archives. He held something in his hand, a folded umbrella. "He's signalling," Catherine whispered. "The umbrella's a cipher." Tuppence narrowed her eyes. "Too public. Too deliberate." "But that's the point," Tommy said. "A message that looks like madness only makes sense to those already cracked." They approached cautiously. The man didn't move. Up close, they saw the pin on his lapel, a golden lion, clawing backward. Old MI6, long before the reforms. His voice, when it came, was like gravel wrapped in silk. "You carry the voice." Tommy nodded. "The film." The man looked toward the sea. "You shouldn't have found it." "But we did." Silence stretched. Finally, the man held out an envelope. "For Langley." "She's missing," Tuppence said. "Then follow the voice and find her." "What's in it?" "A name." "Yours?" "No." And he turned, stepping back into the fog, vanishing as if he were part of it. Back in the shack, they opened the envelope. A single name, Major Gideon Rice, and below it, a location, Falkenstein Estate, Northumberland. Catherine's breath caught. "That's where it started." Tommy looked up. "Chimera?" She nodded. "The first experiment, the first rewriting." Tuppence folded the paper slowly. "Then that's where we ended." The journey north was slow, deliberate. They avoided trains, switched cars, and changed coats 3 times before crossing into Northumberland. By the time they reached the outskirts of the Falkenstein estate, dusk had set in, painting the fields in amber and ash. Falkenstein wasn't listed on any map, Not anymore. It loomed behind overgrown hedgerows and rusted iron gates, its towers half sunk in fog, a relic of empire and secrecy. "Charming," Tuppence murmured. "If one enjoys the aesthetics of buried crimes." Tommy killed the engine. "Let's not knock until we know who answers." Catherine checked her revolver. "If Rice is there, he won't welcome questions." Tuppence's smile was grim. "Then we'll bring answers." The estate was too quiet. No birds, no wind. Only the echo of gravel beneath their steps. Inside, it was colder. Wallpaper peeling in long strips, chandeliers cloaked in dust. But it was the silence, that unnatural stillness, that unsettled Tommy most. It was a silence that didn't merely exist. It watched. In the study, they found the first sign of life. An old phonograph playing a distorted waltz looping the same 6 notes. On the desk, maps, strings connecting faces, but not of enemies, of ministers. Defense, interior, communications, all British. Tuppence whispered, "This is a blueprint for a silent coup." Then footsteps upstairs. They followed the creaking stairs, each step a question. At the top, they found a room sealed with iron bolts. Catherine's voice was barely audible. "That's not to keep someone out." Tommy's hand trembled as he pulled the bolts free. Inside a man, bound to a chair, wires connected to his temples. He looked up and whispered. Langley lied. "None next, nevan mun tiptuk part 4. He Tommy, Tuppence, ba Catherine doi matwe mut ngui danong te kwahu. Bamutsu fanboy chundong. Ban danoi. Next, ChatGPT danoi. Part 4. The voice beneath the flagstones. Tiptuk. The man's voice cracked like dried paper. His skin was waxen, stretched too tight, as though his body had forgotten how to breathe without permission. Langley lied, he repeated, barely a whisper. Tuppence crouched beside him. "Who are you?" "I was Rice." Catherine froze. "Was?" The man gave a faint, broken smile. "What's left of him?" Chimera didn't just rewrite agents. It rewrote commanders. They ran trials on me. Started with erasure, then reconstruction. He tapped the side of his head. "I remember who I was, but it's trapped behind voices that aren't mine." Tommy leaned in. "Where's Langley?" The man winced. "Gone. Not dead, worse. She's protocol null now." Catherine went pale. "That's not real." Rice nodded slowly. "It is. When an operative becomes a liability, too informed, too independent, Chimera doesn't kill them. They reassign them. Turn their identity into a new mission." Tuppence stood. "So she's what? A sleeper?" Rice looked at her with pain. "No. She's become the voice." The silence grew heavy, thick. Rice reached with trembling fingers toward a nearby drawer. "Take it. Before they come." Inside, a sealed envelope. Marked in red. Project Sybil. Eyes only prime channel clearance. Catherine's face twisted. This was restricted to the Royal War Cabinet. Tommy opened it. Inside were photographs Langley, in uniform, entering buildings across Europe, with ministers, with enemy officers, with civilians. Different dates. Different cities. Same expression. Always watching. Always listening. Rice coughed violently. Blood touched his lips. "You have to find her, before they activate the others." "Where?" Tuppence asked. Rice looked at her, eyes now fading. "Follow the code in the song." And then silence. This time, real. Catherine stepped back. "What song?" Tommy turned toward the phonograph. The looping 6-note waltz. He rewound the reel and played it again. A thought struck him. "These aren't just notes. They're numbers." Catherine caught on. A cipher. Musical notation. Frequencies converted into a code. Tuppence was already pulling out a pencil. The notes translated 1 by 1. 51.5074 degrees N, 0.1278 degrees W. Catherine's breath hitched. London. London greeted them not with bombs or sirens, but with the subtle hush of a city that knew how to keep secrets. Tuppence stared out the train window, watching silhouettes drift past in wartime coats and guarded glances. "It's strange," she murmured. "We're walking into the mouth of the beast, and yet it all looks so ordinary." "That's how you know it's working," Catherine replied, "when evil no longer needs to hide." They rented no rooms, used no phones. Every step was planned from back alleys, memory, and instinct. The coordinates had led them to Bloomsbury, a quiet building nestled behind a chapel. It looked abandoned, but the keypad by the cellar door was anything but. Tommy input the final digits of the cipher. The lock clicked open. Beneath the chapel lay a different London. Corridors lit by cold fluorescent light. Thick cables snaking across floors. Rooms padded in soundproofing. And everywhere, silence. Not just absence of sound, but the cultivated kind. The kind grown and harvested. They passed labs, training chambers, a broadcasting booth with a map of Europe littered in red pins. Finally, they reached the inner sanctum. A long corridor with just one nameplate. Commander Langley. Tuppence drew her revolver. "She may not remember us." Tommy nodded. "Or she remembers too much." They entered. Langley sat at a desk, her back to them, studying a bank of monitors. Her voice, when it came, was smooth, controlled. "I was wondering when you'd catch up." She turned. Her eyes were the same, but they saw differently now. "You found Rice," she said. "Then you've read the file." Tommy stepped forward. "You created Chimera. You erased people. I elevated them. You erased yourself." Langley smiled. "No. I shed who I was to become who was needed." Catherine's voice shook. "What are you planning?" Langley gestured to the monitors. "Every major capital. Every target marked. Silence. True silence. Not just of voice, but of dissent. Of chaos. Of the weak pretending they know better." Tuppence raised her gun. Langley didn't flinch. "You won't stop it. It's already begun. Every sleeper waits. One word, one tone, one phrase, and everything changes." Tommy stepped beside Tuppence. "Then we changed the frequency." Langley opened her mouth, but Tuppence fired. Once. Clean. The monitors shattered. The silence cracked. And the voice that had guided Chimera ended. They burned the basement. They scattered the reels. They left no trace. But as the smoke rose over London, and the war above still raged, Tommy knew better. Chimera was wounded, not dead. And silence, once born, was hard to unmake. Part 5. The name that could never be spoken aloud. The fire had barely cooled in the London basement when the first knock came at their safe-house door. It wasn't loud, just 3 firm taps, spaced evenly. A signal. Old school. Before wires and codes, before satellites and drop zones, there were knocks that meant things. Tommy stood, gun already drawn. Tuppence reached the door first. When she opened it, no one was there. Just a box. Inside, a single photograph, and a slip of paper. If Langley was the blade, this is the hand that wielded it. N. The photograph was decades old, creased at the edges. A group of soldiers, British uniforms, faces young and hard with purpose. One circled in red. Catherine leaned closer. "That's not possible." Tommy frowned. "You recognize him?" She nodded. "That man died in 1918. Catherine ran a gloved finger along the edge of the photograph, her expression unreadable. "He was my grandfather's commanding officer during the Somme. Colonel Ivor Merrick. Vanished in the mud," declared Keir. "No body." Tuppence narrowed her eyes. And now someone wants us to believe he's alive. 3 decades later? Tommy's voice was low. Or that his name never stopped being used. Catherine's lips barely moved. Like a call sign. Tuppence looked back at the slip of paper. If Langley was the blade, this is the hand that wielded it. They knew Chimera had spread a hydra with many heads. Langley had only been one. And if there was still a name so dangerous it couldn't be spoken aloud, they were now hunting something older, deeper, a blueprint for betrayal that predated even the war. Tommy folded the photo. We follow the hand. They began in the War Office archives. Catherine pulled strings through an old veteran contact. He met them behind a burned-out post office in Finchley. The Merrick file was buried years ago, he said. Not just classified, buried. What does that mean? Tommy asked. The man lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. It means it doesn't exist, unless you already know it does. He handed over a coded sheet, a registry of names, all linked to Project Engler, a disbanded shadow op from 1917. Supposedly shut down after its methods psychological manipulation, forged identities, induced memory loss, were deemed inhuman, even by wartime standards. And yet, one file was still marked active. Tommy tapped the name. Merrick I. Codename. Hiran. Catherine paled. Heron was referenced in Chimera's earliest training manuals. Then this goes beyond Langley, Tuppence said grimly. We killed the mouth. Now we hunt the mind. They followed the trail north, through crumbling corridors of government memory requisition buildings, sanitariums rebranded as training centers, research facilities buried under new names. Their final lead pointed them to Invercraig, a remote estate in the Scottish Highlands that once served as a psychiatric rehabilitation centre for officers during the Great War. But when they arrived, they found nothing left but ruins. Or so they thought. The estate's main building had collapsed decades ago, but beneath it, hidden under a moss-covered hatch behind the gardener's cottage, was a staircase leading downward. Old, cold, undisturbed. As they descended, the smell of mildew and iron grew stronger. The walls bore carvings, names, tallies, phrases in multiple languages. A madman's diary etched in stone. Then they reached a chamber, circular, steel-lined, lit by weak emergency bulbs still powered by some ancient generator. In the center, a single chair. And in the chair, a man. Old, white hair, combed back, dressed immaculately, waiting, as if he knew they were coming. He looked up. I thought you'd never get here. Tommy stepped forward, gun raised. Colonel Ivor Merrick? The man smiled. That name hasn't been useful in some time. Tuppence's tone was hard. You're Heron. You controlled Langley. You created Chimera. He chuckled. Controlled? No. She was perfected. Catherine's voice was sharp. You erased people. You rewired their lives. Heron's smile faded. I preserved the Empire. He reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a small reel-to-reel tape recorder. Would you like to hear it? Tommy tensed. What is it? Her activation. The first Chimera agent ever born. Before Langley. Before Rice. Before the war ever demanded it. He clicked it on. Static. Then a child's voice fractured, hesitant. My name is Alice, but they call me Heron now. Tuppence recoiled. Catherine stepped back. Because the voice wasn't a stranger's. It was hers. Catherine froze. The voice echoed again, distorted by age and tape hiss, yet unmistakably her own younger, fragile, trembling with obedience. I want to go home, but they say I already am. She stumbled back against the cold steel wall. Her breath caught, shallow and panicked. No, she whispered. That's not possible. I was never. Merrick's Heron's eyes locked onto hers. Your records begin in 1928. Convenient, isn't it? No school before that. No medical file. A foster placement that never filed paperwork. Tommy stepped between them, fury in his voice. You implanted her. Created a life? Then waited? We didn't wait, Heron replied calmly. We watched. And when the time came, Langley activated the others. But Catherine? Catherine was our contingency, a memory designed to remember forgetting. Tuppence was pale. She was the sleeper. Catherine clenched her fists, shaking. Why didn't it work, then? Why didn't I turn? Because Langley broke the protocol, Heron said bitterly. She went rogue. She changed the activation phrase. Catherine wasn't triggered. She was awakened. There was a silence. Deafening. Then Heron reached for a small revolver beside the recorder. He didn't raise it. He held it handle first, offering it to Catherine. It ends here. Either you kill me, or you let me finish the work. Tuppence's voice cracked. Don't! Catherine took the gun slowly. Her hands were steady now. You erased my life. Heron didn't flinch. I gave you a purpose. She stared down the barrel, then turned the gun and fired. But not at him. At the recorder. The tape hiss died. Your voice, she said quietly, doesn't get to live longer than mine. Later, standing in the Highland wind as Invercraig burned behind them, Tommy looked at the smouldering ruins. We ended it, he said. Tuppence didn't answer, because in her hand, Catherine was holding a file. It bore no title, just one symbol, a heron, drawn in ink, and the initials, M.E.F. Part 6. The frequency that could not be broken. The file Catherine had retrieved from the ashes of Invercraig was thin, brittle, and smelled faintly of chemical preservatives like something hidden in salt and thyme. It had no index, no explanation, no clear origin, but the initials M.E.F. appeared on every page. They were back in London now, in a safe house near Hampstead Heath. Catherine had barely slept. I ran it through every database we have access to, she told Tommy and Tuppence. No hits on M.E.F. Not in records, not in encryption keys, not even in dead letter protocols. Tuppence paced the room. So it's a ghost signature? Worse, Catherine replied. It's deliberate absence. Like someone went to extreme lengths to ensure M.E.F. was never traced. Tommy tapped the edge of the file. Then we treat it like a radio transmission. Find the frequency, decode the signal. Tommy's instincts led them to a forgotten military outpost outside Bletchley, long since decommissioned. Officially, it had been a radio relay station. Unofficially, Catherine confirmed it had been a signal conditioning lab, a place where frequency manipulation was tested on volunteers, or subjects. The team entered through the ventilation shaft. The main access tunnel was blocked by debris, likely intentional. Inside, dust hung thick in the stale air, but the equipment was oddly intact. Rusted dials, twisted coils, and stacks of dusty tape reels. One console still hummed faintly, with residual power from a backup generator long past its lifespan. Tuppence scanned a label. M.E.F. Do not sync to active line. Tommy's eyes narrowed. Omega frequency. That's not a warning. It's a threat. Catherine loaded the reel marked MEF3A. The signal that crackled out wasn't voice, not words. Just a pulsing rhythm. Like Morse. But not quite. She froze. This isn't Morse. It's biological. What? Tuppence asked. It's keyed to human neural response cycles. The pauses match the way the brain reacts to fear. Someone encoded trauma into sound. Tommy's voice was grim. A weapon that programs obedience. The signal suddenly spiked. A second tone emerged, buried beneath the primary layer. And this time it spoke. Agent confirmed. Frequency lock engaged. Awaiting directive from M.E.F. Tuppence's voice cracked. It's still active. Catherine slowly removed her earpiece, white as a sheet. This isn't just about Chimera, she whispered. This is the foundation. Chimera was the product. But M.E.F. is the operating system. The deeper they dug, the clearer the scope became. Across a cracked map pinned to the outpost's wall, stitched together from torn fragments and typed annotations, were red dots spanning from Glasgow to Berlin, Prague to Marseille. Each marked a signal convergence node, locations where the M.E.F frequencies had once been broadcast, and some, alarmingly, were still receiving power. One stood out. Node 14, Val-de-Grâce, Paris. An abandoned hospital that, during the war, had served as both an intelligence hub and psychiatric facility under Allied jurisdiction. Files suggested Node 14 was used to reinforce sleeper conditioning on agents too unstable to deploy immediately. "What if some of them are still there?" Tuppence whispered. Catherine was already packing. "Then they've been listening for 30 years, waiting for someone to say the right words. They arrived in Paris under aliases, working through a network of resistance veterans. Val-de-Grâce had long since been shuttered, but the catacombs beneath it, forgotten by most, still existed a labyrinth of silence and stone. They descended by lantern light. The deeper they went, the more the air hummed. Not audibly, but felt in the bones, in the blood, like a low vibration tickling the base of the spine. Then came the door. Steel? Reinforced. Not locked. Sealed. Tuppence glanced at Catherine. "Do you feel it?" Catherine's expression was distant. Cold. "I hear. Music." Tommy tensed. She stepped forward, placed her hand against the door. And it opened. Inside were 5 cots, each occupied. Men and women in perfectly preserved uniforms, breathing in unison, eyes open, unblinking, connected by wires to a central console and a speaker. One of them, a woman in British field gear, turned slowly and whispered, "Directive awaiting final tone. Say the name." Catherine's lips trembled, because she knew the name. It wasn't spoken. It was implanted. M.E.F. She clutched her head, staggering. Tommy caught her. "What is it?" "They used me. I was the final tone. Every mission, every activation, I carried it. In my voice." The realization hit Tommy and Tuppence like a flood. Catherine hadn't just been a victim of Chimera, or even a byproduct of Langley's programming. She was the carrier signal, a walking transmitter of control phrases hidden beneath natural speech. Every operation she'd touched, every briefing she'd spoken, every order she had relayed could have activated any sleeper within range. And here in Node 14, the final command was about to be delivered. The sleepers stirred. Not violently, not yet, but their eyes blinked, their hands flexed. One began softly mouthing a phrase, as though recalling a nursery rhyme. "Fall not for the fire shall fall." Tommy reached for the console. "We shut this down, now." But Catherine stopped him. "No, it's not just sound. The system's networked. It's embedded in my cadence. If we sever it mid-broadcast, it could trigger a failsafe. Fry their brains or activate something worse." Tuppence turned to her. "So, what do we do?" Catherine stared into the eyes of the sleeping agents. "I override it." She stepped to the microphone. The console's lights flared, sensing a familiar tone profile. The sleeper agents sat upright, eerily still, like statues waiting for a conductor. Catherine spoke slow, deliberate, and calm. "Command priority override. Frequency M.E.F. O. Cancel recursion. Return to baseline. Cease all execution cycles." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the agents blinked, blinked again, then collapsed back onto the cots, not lifeless, but asleep. Normal sleep. Tommy exhaled. "You stopped it." But Catherine shook her head, staring at the monitor. "No, I delayed it." On the console, a final light had begun to blink. A warning. "Transmission rerouted to Node 0. Tuppence leaned in. "Where the hell is Node 0? Catherine's voice was hollow. "London. Part 7. The Code That Wrote Itself." London wasn't just a return to the beginning, it was a descent into the origin. While much of MI5's wartime infrastructure had been either mothballed or modernized beyond recognition, a few places remained unchanged, forgotten. Hidden beneath the post office tower, behind utility lifts and sealed corridors, was what once had been Crown Channel Zero, a command and decryption nexus. It was where Operation Engler had first been whispered into existence, and it was now reawakening. Catherine led the way through a maintenance tunnel beneath the post office tower. Water dripped in rhythmic echoes from rusted pipes overhead. The walls grew narrower, the air colder, until finally they reached a reinforced steel door. Tuppence read the plate above it. C.Z.R. Crown Zero Repository. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Never heard of it. Catherine responded, "You weren't meant to." She entered the last code she remembered not from memory, but from reflex. Like muscle, remembering music fingers had once played. The lock clicked. Inside, the room was perfectly preserved. A Cold War-era bunker filled with rows of analog terminals and early tape drives, blinking silently in slumber. A single terminal was active running code that no one had typed. Tommy approached the screen. Lines of programming language scrolled, not typed by a user but by the system itself. It wasn't stored code. It was self-generating. Tuppence whispered, "Autonomous scripting?" "No," Catherine said, breathless. "It's recursive. The system is writing to itself. Updating directives based on data it's only just receiving. It was learning. And the header on every loop? Initiate. M.E.F. prime, node 0. Next target. Undefined, awaiting voice confirmation. A new line appeared on screen in real time. Subject, Catherine M. Gray. Match confirmed. The speakers clicked on. A familiar, cold voice echoed. "Welcome home, Prime Carrier." The room darkened as the terminals powered up in sequence, one after the other, like a cathedral of light forming around them. On screen, lines of cascading logic pulsed with purpose. Prime Carrier active. Sequence. Final broadcast in 4. 0 min. Catherine stood frozen. Not in fear, in synchronization. Tommy grabbed her shoulder. "Catherine! Snap out of it!" But she wasn't hearing him. She was listening not to him, but to the frequency humming just beneath audibility. Node 0 was communicating directly through her brain's auditory cortex, bypassing conscious understanding. Tuppence shouted, "She's being pulled in." Catherine turned. But her voice wasn't hers. Prime sequence initiated. All systems aligned. Directive rewrite begins now. Tommy's blood ran cold. She is becoming the system. Desperate. Tuppence lunged toward the console, pulling wires, smashing the interface. But the system adapted. Alternate voice path selected. Tuppence Beresford. Match failed. Tommy Beresford. Partial match. Tommy froze. Why partial? Catherine's voice, or the system using it, answered, "You were exposed. Invercraig. 2 years ago. We tested your resistance. Your memories were edited. Your name encoded." Tuppence backed away from the console. No. He'd remember. "Would he?" said Catherine, stepping closer. "What if everything you've done since then was a test of compliance?" Tommy stared at her. Then, slowly, reached into his coat and produced a silver-plated trigger device. The one piece of technology that had survived every mission, every raid. A dead man's switch. "I don't remember you giving this to me," he said quietly. Catherine blinked, and in that moment her body trembled not from control, but from resistance. She fought it, whispered, "Break the loop," and collapsed. The terminals exploded into red. Integrity failure. Carrier rejected. Emergency override. In 30 seconds. Tommy grabbed Catherine. "We need to cut power." Tuppence already had her hands on the circuit breakers. "Hold her!" And, with one final pull, darkness. When the emergency lights flickered on, the bunker felt like a tomb. Catherine lay unconscious in Tommy's arms, sweat beading on her temple. Her pulse was strong but irregular, like her body was still rejecting a code it couldn't unlearn. The air hung heavy with silence, and beneath that silence, a whisper not mechanical but biological, like residual echoes of frequencies that had once danced through her bones. Tuppence stood over the shattered console. "Is it over?" Tommy didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the blank monitors. No alarms. No script. No signal. Only a small prompt blinking faintly in the corner. Connection lost. Reconnecting. He flicked the breaker. Everything died. They made their way up through the old tunnels, carrying Catherine between them. London's morning light cut across the grime of forgotten stairwells as they emerged behind a disused service entrance disguised for decades beneath a false telecommunications shed. The city moved on above them, buses rumbling, pigeons flitting, life unconcerned. But below, something had awakened. And though they had cut the cord, the question remained. Had the system truly died? Or was it just waiting? That night, in a safe house far from the tower, Catherine stirred. She opened her eyes. Tommy leaned in. "You're safe. You fought it. You won." She looked at him, truly looked, and then whispered, "Tommy." The voice wasn't just mine. Tuppence asked, "What do you mean?" Catherine's hand gripped the blanket. "There's a second carrier. Part 8. The echo that called itself forward." The revelation shattered whatever fragile silence remained. A second carrier. Catherine sat on the edge of the bunk in the dimly lit safe house, eyes haunted but lucid. Her voice no longer echoed with algorithmic undertone, it was hers again. But the certainty with which she spoke made the room colder. M.E.F. Prime was never meant to be singular. Tuppence folded her arms. "Who is it? Who's the second?" Catherine shook her head slowly. "I don't know. That's the danger. They don't even know they're it." Not yet. The only clue Catherine retained was auditory, a sound embedded deep in her mind, like a mnemonic key. A voice she couldn't identify, repeating a name she couldn't remember, with a background hum that didn't match any known location in Britain. But Tommy recognized something else. The sound profile. "That's not from here," he said. "That's Eastern European. Sub-bass resonance. Old Soviet acoustics." Tuppence narrowed her eyes. "Krakow?" Catherine blinked. Something stirred in her memory. Yes. There was a listening post, underground. It was part of Project Glassbell. That name hadn't been spoken in decades. Within 24 hours they were in Poland under forged credentials, following whispers through old Cold War channels. The city's charm, its Gothic spires and cobbled squares, felt like a mask. Below the streets, beneath a decommissioned monastery, was Echo Vault 12. The entrance was welded shut, but Catherine found the old tune again, a fragment of frequency that triggered an ancient relay lock. The vault opened, like a breath that had waited 40 years. Inside was dust and rot and sound. Even with the speakers unplugged, they could hear it. A low, rhythmic tapping like a heart trying to remember itself. Tuppence found the reel-to-reel archive. One tape was still turning. Not spinning ticking. Tommy put on headphones and listened. "Hello? Is someone there? I don't know who I am. But if you're hearing this, I think I've done something terrible." It was a woman's voice. Catherine froze. "I know that voice." Tommy's eyes widened. "You should." He held up the tape box. On it, handwritten in smudged ink, C.M. Gray. Echo copy, do not play. Catherine's hands trembled as she took the headphones from Tommy. The tape crackled with age, but the voice was unmistakably hers, younger, frantic, barely masking the fear. "They told me I had to do it. That it was the only way to preserve the pattern. I didn't want to. I swear I didn't. But it's inside now and it's still echoing." Tuppence stepped back. "How old is that recording?" Tommy answered, "At least 25 years. Maybe more." Catherine whispered. "That's impossible. I didn't come to Krakow. I've never—" But the voice interrupted her again. "If you find this, it means you." A mechanical click. Then silence. Behind them, one of the monitors flickered to life. It wasn't connected to anything. Just a dark green glow pulsing with a single line. M.E.F. Carrier 2 located. Tracking active. A map unfolded. Coordinates began to scroll. Not Krakow. Not London. But Valletta. Malta. Tommy's brow furrowed. That's British Cis territory. Someone embedded deep. Tuppence. Could be a diplomat. Could be a defector. Could be— Catherine's voice was flat. Could be a sleeper. And if the second carrier was still dormant, the countdown had already started. They had no choice. The next flight was to Valletta. Malta welcomed them with warmth and brightness, a deceptive embrace for what Catherine described as the most silent place on the map. They moved under diplomatic cover, accessing an old SIS contact who owed Tommy a favor. What they uncovered was worse than they feared. Someone had recently accessed classified comms through a Cold War-era shortwave transmitter, one that hadn't been in use since 1989, and it had broadcast only one word. Tuppence's name. Repeated. Slowly. Like a ghost calling home. Tuppence. Tuppence. Catherine's face went white. It's a loop trigger. They're calling her. Tuppence straightened. Well, they're not going to get me. Tommy disagreed. They already have. That night, Tuppence began talking in her sleep, in German, in code, and in a voice not entirely her own. Catherine recorded it and decoded one chilling phrase. Carrier awakened, countdown intact. Directive will proceed upon contact. The second carrier wasn't just in Valletta. The second carrier had been traveling with them the entire time. Part 9. The silence that taught itself to scream. They fled Valletta before dawn. Tuppence hadn't spoken since the recording. She sat in the plane's rear cabin, staring out the window, lips moving in silence. Tommy watched her, helpless. Catherine sat beside him, working through the transcripts. These aren't activation phrases, she murmured. They're coordinates, timers, directives hidden inside her subconscious. Someone embedded this years ago, long before we ever heard of M.E.F. Tommy's voice cracked. But why her? Catherine looked up. Because she's perfect. No one would ever suspect a woman who solved puzzles to save lives could one day destroy them. Paris? It was never meant to be their destination, but the coordinates Tuppence whispered in her sleep pointed there, a forgotten district once used for courier drops between British and French resistance during WWII. A side alley behind an abandoned music conservatory led them to it. A cellar. Inside, a dusty phonograph stood silently. Catherine approached it cautiously. The record on the turntable was unmarked, no label, no grooves visible to the eye. She dropped the needle, and the walls began to vibrate. Not from sound, but from frequency. The kind that bypassed the ear and burrowed straight into the mind. Tuppence dropped to her knees, gasping. Her mouth moved on its own. Directive code 47. Preparing echo link. Synchronizing phase pattern. Tommy rushed to her. Tuppence, fight it! But her eyes had changed. Not blank calculating. Silence must be preserved. Echo must be transferred. Catherine pulled a pocket jammer from her coat and activated it. The room fell still. Tuppence blinked. Confused. Shaken. Tears welled in her eyes. I heard myself, she whispered. I heard myself, but I didn't say it. Tommy held her tightly. You're still you. Catherine wasn't so sure. Not for long. Whatever was in that frequency was only the first phase. She held up a note, hidden beneath the phonograph. Phase 2 begins in Vienna. Vienna, the city of music, memory, and espionage. As the train slid into the Hauptbahnhof, Tommy noticed something odd. The platform was crowded, but no one was looking at them. That alone was a red flag. "We're being watched," he whispered to Catherine. She nodded. "They're using sleepers, eyes with no memories." They made their way through the city under the guise of tourists. Tuppence moved with a stiffness, as if her body knew it was on a path she couldn't escape. The coordinates led to a defunct opera house, once used by Soviet informants to pass messages during the Iron Curtain era. Inside, a hidden passage behind the stage led them to a chamber lined with mirrors all cracked, reflecting distorted versions of themselves. In the center was a chair, padded, wired, and on the wall, written in German, "To silence the scream, you must hear it." Catherine paled. "It's a memory." Tuppence turned slowly. "Then it's true." She walked to the chair. Tommy stepped forward, panicked. "No. We don't even know what it does." But Tuppence looked back at him, gently. "If I am the second carrier, this is the only way to see what they put inside me." She sat. The machine whirred. And then silence. But not empty silence. Silence like breath before a scream. Her eyes closed. Her fingers twitched. Then, in a whisper, "I remember the name of the one who created M.E.F. Catherine leaned in. Tuppence opened her eyes, darker than before. His name was Tommy. Part 10. The sound that never had a beginning. Tommy staggered back, the word echoing in. Tommy. The creator of M.E.F? "No," he muttered. "That's not possible." Tuppence sat still, her breath steady, eyes locked in a trance. Catherine's fingers flew over her portable scanner, trying to intercept the memory stream before it faded. "It's not about you directly," she whispered. "It's about a project that carried your name." Tommy blinked. "A decoy?" "No," Catherine said. "A ghost protocol. They used your war record your missions, your identity to create a deep-fake persona, a perfect cover for someone who never existed, or always did." Tuppence stood up. She was different now. Still herself, but as if someone had peeled back decades of fog. It was never just about Nazi spies, never just about traitors. She looked at Tommy. M.E.F was built to survive after the war, to endure any regime, to infiltrate the future. Outside, Vienna hummed with the pretense of normalcy trams clattering past, laughter from cafe tables, the echo of a violin on the breeze. But beneath that beauty, a storm was unraveling. Inside the opera house, everything had changed. Tuppence wasn't dazed anymore. She moved with a certainty that frightened Tommy, not because she was dangerous, but because she knew too much, far more than she should. She turned to them. M.E.F was never a wartime tool. It was a legacy weapon. Catherine's voice was hoarse. "You mean something built to survive peace?" Tuppence nodded. "To survive truth." She stepped forward and traced a finger across the cracked mirror wall, finding a groove almost invisible. A panel slid open. Behind it, a steel box blinked. Analog. Cold War era. A transmitter. Catherine gasped. "That's British hardware. Deep Level 3. We buried that tech in the late 70s. Tuppence. "Not all of it. Some nodes were kept active, kept breathing." Tommy stepped forward, jaw clenched. "You're telling me that the people we trusted, the people we worked for, left these sleeper transmitters alive?" Catherine's voice trembled. "Not just transmitters, memory anchors, for personalities, for directives, for control," Tuppence finished. She turned to Tommy. "You were used. Your name, your missions. They created something called Node Zero, a centralized construct for memory projection." Tommy narrowed his eyes. "Projection?" Tuppence's gaze was dark. "Replication. They didn't just store intelligence, they built identities on top of it. Test pattern humans. Mosaics of memories. They seeded them through assets, and through me." A pause. The gravity of it crushing. Tommy shook his head. "So what are you saying, Tuppence? That you're not real?" She stepped forward. "I'm saying I'm not just me. I'm also a key. And if someone unlocks me, Node Zero reboots." Catherine backed away. "We have to destroy this now, before it links to the others." But it was already too late. The panel blinked. Node 0 uplink in progress. A low tone filled the room, not a sound, but something deeper. Like the bones inside their skulls were vibrating. Tuppence whispered, "It's calling the others." Tommy pulled her away. "We have to run." But as they turned, the mirrors began to shift, no longer reflecting them, but versions of themselves. Tommy in an SS uniform. Tuppence delivering orders in fluent Russian. Catherine with blood on her hands and a badge that read Division 9. Not reflections. Possibilities. Tommy raised his gun and fired at the panel. Sparks flew. The tone died. The mirrors faded back to normal, but the message stayed, burning across the display. Uplink halted. Backup initiated London. Failsafe active. Tuppence collapsed. Catherine caught her, already prepping a sedative. "She won't last much longer," Catherine said. "The code is destabilizing her brain." Tommy knelt beside them, voice hollow. "Then we end it. We go back." Catherine looked at him. "You mean London?" "No," Tommy said. "We go to where it all began, where the first echo was recorded, where your name became mine." Tuppence opened her eyes, just enough to speak. Node 0. Back in England, clouds rolled heavy over the coast. Their contact, an aging intelligence relic named Elbridge, met them in a decommissioned lighthouse near Dover, once a listening post, now a graveyard of forgotten signals. He looked Tommy over, then Tuppence. "I told them you'd come back, when the noise got too loud to ignore." "Tommy, where is Node 0? Elbridge didn't answer directly. Instead, he handed over a weathered dossier marked Operation Silencer. Inside, a black-and-white photo of a seaside guesthouse, familiar, almost nostalgic. "It's always been there," Elbridge said. "Where you started, where she started, and where M.E.F will try to finish." Tuppence paled. "The guesthouse. Sans souci." They arrived just before midnight. Time hadn't touched the place. Same chipping paint, same crooked sign swinging in the wind. But inside, every room was wired, not visibly, but beneath the walls, behind the mirrors, under the floorboards. Node 0 wasn't a server room. It was a house of memories. Catherine found the central terminal beneath the cellar. An old wireless unit dressed up in modern shielding. She connected her rig. "It's broadcasting, not just receiving. It's still pushing the signal." Tommy glanced at Tuppence, whose expression had gone blank. "Directive 7C, she murmured. "Time to rejoin the silence." Tommy grabbed her hands. "Stay with me." She smiled, but it wasn't hers. "You were always loyal, even when I wasn't me." Suddenly, the floor above them creaked. Footsteps. Catherine turned. "They found us." "Tommy." "Who?" But the answer was already walking down the stairs. Sir Alec Durnford, their old handler, the man who had sent them on their first mission, long presumed dead. Except his face was wrong. Too smooth, too still, synthetic. "M.E.F survived," it said in a voice perfectly British, perfectly cold. "You did not." He reached into his coat, not for a gun, but for a switch. One final echo. And then, silence eternal. Tommy didn't hesitate. He tackled the replica to the ground as Catherine overloaded the transmitter with a frequency burst. Sparks flew. The walls groaned. Tuppence, half-conscious, crawled to the chair in the corner. The same chair from Vienna. She connected the final wire. "If I'm the voice, then I can choose what it says." Tommy shouted, "No! It'll kill you." Tuppence smiled. Then let it scream. She activated the core. The entire house shuddered. Every mirror shattered. Every frequency bled white noise. Catherine pulled Tommy out just as the floor collapsed. Inside, Tuppence sat, whispering. The silence was never empty. It just waited for someone to listen. Epilogue. Months later, Tommy sat in a quiet field overlooking the channel. A small radio sat beside him, broken. Or maybe just resting. Catherine joined him, carrying tea. "No signs of residual code," she said. She did it. She stopped it. Tommy looked out at the sea. She wasn't a code. She wasn't an echo. He paused. She was the one voice they never controlled. And somewhere, deep in the static of the world, a whisper lingered. "Tommy?"